No!
How about this? The U.S. Park Police are...
Start by storming Blackgate!
What's going on, everyone? So firstly, I wanted to say I know that this video is very much so late. Most people obviously release their top 10 favorite films of said year towards the end of December or January. For me, I didn't really watch too many movies in 2020, especially compared to other years. Most of the time I would watch 100 plus movies in theaters, but I just personally wasn't really able to transition as well as a lot of other people from going to the theater all the time to then having to free for all on streaming because there's so many streaming services. So I ended up watching only about 70 movies, which is about half of what I normally would see in terms of like new releases. So this isn't going to be as tightly woven as, you know, my other top 10 videos that I've done in the past, such as like my top 10 of 2019, 2018, but nonetheless, I still was able to cobble this together. I was able to think about it, and I'm able to give it to you guys now. So this is, again, the top 10 best movies of 2020, and of course, my opinion. I'll be going from 10 to 1, with obviously my number 1 being my favorite of that year, the one that had the most impact. But to start things off, I'm also going to give honorable mentions, and then we can obviously get to number 10. So all the explanation aside, let's get started, guys. So some of my honorable mentions were The Gentleman, which I picked up on 4K. I really enjoyed this movie. I gave it a second watch, and I enjoyed it even more. And then we have Another Round, which currently isn't on home media just yet, but I liked it. Not as good as The Hunt, obviously, but Another Round was still very enjoyable, and I'm probably going to watch it a second time in the future. Sound of Metal was also pretty good. It's on Amazon Prime, so definitely check that out. And then Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. I think this is a movie that should be shown in health classes. It's really good. It's very educational, very well crafted. I enjoyed it. And then, of course, you have The Devil of All Time, which I have to say this. I think it is flawed for sure, but there's something about it that's quite ambitious that I really enjoyed. And I am going to probably watch this again too, because there's just so many things that happen in this movie, man. I really liked it. It's kind of like a lesser version of Place Beyond the Pines, but The Place Beyond the Pines is great. So I'm probably going to watch this a second time, just why it's an honorable mention. So now, guys, let's get into number 10 to 1. So my number 10 is The Empty Man. This is one of the more recent 2020 films that I saw. I'll never forget when this came out in theaters around Halloween. And I remember being on the AMC app and, you know, considering seeing this because I was like, oh, it's a horror crime movie with James Badgedale, something, whatever his name is. And I was like, yeah, I like him as an actor. Like, he was in The Grey. He's a good actor. But I just didn't see it. I forget why. I saw something else instead. But now all of a sudden I hear a lot of positive feedback from this movie, and I'm like, man, I really should have seen it. So then I finally sat down and watched it. Shout out to my friend Eric. He rented it and let me use his Vudu account so that way I could watch it. And I enjoyed this movie. I very much so was engaged by it. The first 20 minutes honestly felt like, you know, the ending of any horror film, but the first 20 minutes ends with the title card. And I was like, that's an effective opening, man. Like that alone makes it worth watching. I also really like the cinematography. I did like the story. I think that this is a better version of like Slender Man, which I know if you watch my review, I was positive towards that, but in retrospect, that movie wasn't good. But I enjoyed it because for me, I look back and I'm like, that's the movie where I was able to, you know, say that, hey, my friend Marv and I, we met that time, we watched that movie, and we bonded over it. But this is definitely a better version of that, I think. And I do like the fact that it is I believe, first-time director tackling essentially what would have been a blockbuster if it wasn't COVID-19, and he made it his own, and it's ambitious to say the least. It does have a lot of creepy scenes. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I get why on Letterboxd there are some people that really don't like this movie, but also why people love this movie. I'm more in the middle, but lean more towards the positive. I'll definitely be revisiting this in the future, probably around Halloween time. So yeah, that's my number 10. Next up, my number 9 is The Invisible Man. So truth be told, The Invisible Man is a movie that came out, I believe, February of 2020, and I, honest to God, thought this would be like an honorable mention, if that. Not that it was bad or anything, but I was kind of like, well, it's early in the year. How often is it a film comes out early in the year and, you know, it actually makes my top 10 list? Well, obviously the pandemic happened, so there was a lot less movies that came out. So this ended up making my top 10. I like this movie. This is another one of those movies, kind of like The Empty Man, where horror is really a subjective genre. You know, you find that out real quick on Letterboxd. I liked this movie. I thought the filmmaking was pretty darn good. I liked the lead performance. I'm a huge Elizabeth Moss fan. I think she's a great actress. She makes it her own. I don't think this is as good as Upgrade, which is the director's previous film, but I still very much so like this movie, especially the first 10 minutes, which is all visual-based storytelling. I really liked it. I think that this movie definitely was one of the early films this year that showed potential of like what 2020 could be. But obviously with 2020, with how it turned out, it was kind of like, oh. But I like this movie. I thoroughly enjoy this movie. If you haven't seen it, I would definitely recommend it. I've seen it 3 times. I like it. That's why I own it on 4K. Next up, number 8 is Mank, which, truth be told, Mank is a film that I was very much so excited for. I'm a huge fan of Citizen Kane. I'm a huge, huge fan of David Fincher. And I was let down by this movie. And hear me out. I say let down despite having this on my list because it wasn't a perfect film. And I've come to expect that from Fincher. Him making perfected movies that just, honest to God, are not only entertaining, but are filmmaking masterpieces. And this film, from a filmmaking perspective, is great. But I personally found the story and the characters not to be as engaging as his other films usually have. They're usually palpable and are populated by characters that I care about, and same with the storytelling method and pacing. But at the same time, I also want to revisit this movie because I feel like this movie might get better upon rewatch, which is why I have this a little bit higher than these other 2 entries, because I see myself watching this again and liking it more. I'm not just saying that because it's like, oh, I'm a huge fan of Fincher. It's because I genuinely think that I didn't go into it knowing enough. Like, this is a film that feels like you need to have like a basic knowledge of like 1940s, politics and everything, which I kind of did, but not enough to where this movie was like, hey, you need to know a little bit more. So I've done my research, so I'm looking to rewatch this movie and hopefully like it even more. I get why people don't like this movie. Like, I've seen some people really hate on this movie. I get it. But again, I still think this movie was solid, and the filmmaking alone is why this movie is number 8. Next up, number 7 is Nomadland, which honestly feels like a documentary. It was very effective. I don't know about rewatching it multiple times. I feel like I might watch it once or twice more. Similar to Mank, I feel like Mank and Nomadland are very similar in those regards where, from a filmmaking perspective, I really respect it. But Nomadland takes it a step further where the mundane is pretty much the point of it. You see the mundane life of Frances McDormand's character. You see that. And honestly, it feels very relatable because one of the jobs she works at is Amazon. And that was one of the jobs that I worked at previously. Not Amazon per se, but UPS, but same thing. So I was able to really relate to. And honestly, there was a lot of things that was kind of intriguing because I really did feel like this movie gave you perspective. It really made you feel for this character as to why she's living this lifestyle. Like, I personally could not live this lifestyle, but it gave me perspective as to why someone would. And for that, I really liked it. Also, the fact that this director is going to be making a Marvel movie that's coming out later on this year, if obviously it gets released, kind of crazy. But honestly, it really shows that she cares about characters, so I'm down. I like that. I like when an independent filmmaker goes from that to a blockbuster, although I do feel like, and again, this is obviously a tangent, but I do also feel like an independent filmmaker should then go into a mid-budget movie before big blockbuster, which this director's not doing, but that's the norm these days. But hopefully she makes another good film because Nomadland, as it stands, it's very effective. I liked it. It's very well acted, and I can see it definitely getting some Oscar wins come Oscar time. Next up, that's my number 7. Next up, my number 6 is Minari, which is an A24 film. I like this movie, man. Honestly, it also kind of reminds me of, ironically enough, Nomadland and Mank, where it is a slice-of-life approach, but I felt like this movie was more personable because you really did feel like the craft was very personal to the director. And honestly, I watched some interviews, I should say, and the director very much so was very personable. Like, he literally took some things from his life and painted it obviously onto the big screen. And it shows because the movie is very much so something where it's a cut from time, from the 1980s. It cuts from that time, and it's really something that makes you feel like you're in that time period. And similar to Nomadland, it's something where I personally could not imagine living in a camper. I personally could not imagine living, that way that they did. But at the same time, you get to see the main character's passion. You get to see why he chooses that and why he does what he does, as well as perspective of just honestly immigration and how difficult it is for many people and how they themselves are trying to obviously make it in America, but at the same time make it so that way their kids don't have to work as hard or their kind of lifestyle that they're living to better themselves. So it's interesting. I think the movie was very well made. I love the score. I love the cinematography. I can definitely see this also similar to Nomadland picking up some Oscars because it's a very beautiful film, and I don't know about rewatchability value. That's my only thing with this movie is that similar to Nomadland and Mank, I don't know if I'm going to watch this movie many more times. But who knows? It could be like, you know, Moonlight, where Moonlight I watched once. I was like, I don't know if I could rewatch this again. And now it's one of my favorite films of all time. So I don't know. Who knows? But Minari, it definitely stuck with me. I liked it. And yeah, that's why it's my number 6. Next up, my number 5 is... Oh boy, Tenet. So, Tenet is a film that it's safe to say that it's kind of controversial, from the sound mixing to the storytelling to, honestly, I feel like everything about this movie, come to think about it, there's not much where people are able to 100% agree on, other than maybe the visual effects. But I personally dug this movie. I definitely see that it's flawed. I know that it's flawed. After watching it a second time, I see that it's flawed. I mean, for crying out loud, the character's first name is literally protagonist. Like, that's his name. And then, of course, you also have the controversial sound mixing, which I personally liked it. I like that, especially since a lot of times it drowned out exposition, which I'm fine with that, because I feel like the exposition in this movie especially was very on the nose. Like, I get it that some people are saying this movie was confusing, but truth be told, I didn't really think that. It did kind of seem like it was simple, except for the inversion scenes. When the inversion scenes happened, that was when it was kind of like, oh, what's going on? But that's what makes it fascinating. I think that's what gives it rewatchability value, because you're able to watch those scenes again and again and able to try to pick up new and nuanced things. I liked it. I also like how Nolan, similar to Jonathan Nolan, has this tendency of showing a scene and you're kind of like, what the heck? And then later on in the movie, showing that same scene, but it's recontextualized. I like that approach. I liked it so much that in my movie, Will Open Drive, I also use that approach, because I think it's something that honestly gives you not only perspective as to what I already mentioned, but it gives you an idea of what's going on from like all points of view, which I really liked. I think that it really kind of shows that obviously in life there's, you know, different points of views, and that in itself is also intriguing. Tenet, it's not amazing, but I really like this movie, and from a technical standpoint especially, I really liked it. Glad it picked up a couple Oscar nominations, and yeah, I dig this movie. So that's my number 5. Next up, my number 4 is I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which I know in my review I gave like a 3.5 and a 5-star rating, but I think that this Charlie Kaufman film, and I said this in my review, is that I need to think about it more. And after processing it, you know, having 6+ months to think about it, I really like this movie. I think that this movie is very effective. I am very happy the fact that it's on Netflix, so that way it can try to get even more of an audience. I'm a huge Charlie Kaufman fan. I don't think this is one of his best films, but I do think that it is still a strong entry in his filmography. And hopefully people come across it. They'll see that it's strange, but at the same time, they'll also see that there's a lot to pick up on. It's almost like a Rubik's Cube, where it's like it's constantly moving. Your perspective is constantly shifting with this movie. And I like it. I'm looking forward to revisiting it. Next up, my number 3 is Gretel and Hansel, which I can't lie. If you watch my review for this movie, I gave it like a 2.5 out of 5. And my thing with buying movies is that I have to give a film at least a 3.5, bare minimum. Most of my films that I own, I usually give at least a 4 out of 5. Obviously, there's some exceptions, but that's just my rule of thumb. Both Gretel and Hansel, I bought it for like $6 around Black Friday, because I was like, you know what? This movie I can't stop thinking about. I can't stop thinking about the cinematography. I can't stop thinking about, honestly, the score. Holy cow, I've listened to the score many times. And just the ending. The ending I just found very beautiful. So I bought it, and upon the second viewing, I really like this film. And I can see myself loving it even more. Like, this is a film that, in terms of rewatchability value, I can see myself watching it many more times, because it's short, it's to the point, and honestly, there's a lot of visual storytelling. It's visual storytelling based over exposition based. And I like that. I think that this movie, honestly, will probably get a cult following. One of my friends, Eric, he actually said that, and I wasn't quite sure 100%. I was like, I don't know, man. But upon watching the second time, definitely agree with his stance. And honestly, I really like this movie. I get why it has mixed reviews, especially on Letterboxd, but I personally really dig this movie. I think it's a strong entry in the horror genre. And honestly, in terms of the story of Hansel and Gretel, I think this is probably the best one I've seen. Although, to be fair, I haven't seen too much. And after seeing the 2013 Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters, yeah, there's not much competition, but still, I really dig this movie. It's a fresh take, and I especially like what they did with the aspect ratios, where, you know, the beginning is the 1 aspect ratio, and then the title card happens, and then it cuts to 4:3 aspect ratio. Loved it. Honestly, also used that for Will Open Drive. So I love this film. So yeah, that's my number 3. Next up, my number 2 is The Father. which currently isn't on home release, unfortunately. But I really like this movie. This is almost like a mystery film. You really do feel as though you're in a perspective of the lead character who has dementia. So it's very interesting because you'll see something that occurs to the lead character and then something else happens and you're like, wait a minute, I thought this and then you're like, wait a minute, I'm confused now. And it's like awesome because it really does feel like a very experimental film. And I like the approach too, because don't get me wrong, we've seen films before about dementia patients, but this felt very fresh. And Anthony Hopkins, I personally think he should win Best Actor. He nailed it. He did such a great job. And honestly, I'm very excited to rewatch this movie because, again, it feels like a mystery film, especially with the twist at the end. And I wasn't expecting that. And I think it really was effective. And the last couple minutes are very saddening. But at the same time, I think that this movie is important. I don't know if people that actually have, individuals that are dealing with dementia in their life will be able to handle this movie. But for someone like myself that doesn't have to deal with that, it gave me a lot of insight into people that do, unfortunately, have to deal with that. So I love this movie. I really liked it, and that's why it's my number 2. Next up, my number 1 is the film that got released on home media, but I did not pick it up, and I'll explain a little bit why. But my number 1 is Promising Young Woman. I love this film, man. I really do. So, in my area, theaters opened up and then they ended up closing in December. This movie was released Christmas time. So, I unfortunately wasn't able to see it around Christmas time. I did not feel like renting it or anything, despite being excited for it. Theaters got re-released in January. And honestly, at that point, I felt very sluggish with 2020 films because I was like, man, I'm not really liking this year in terms of films. Because for crying out loud, the film I made in Sizer was like in my top 10. So I was just kind of like, what the heck? Like these movies just this year just aren't really that strong. But Promising Young Woman, I felt like was what really kind of brought me back into grasp for my love of new cinema. Because Promising Young Woman feels very refreshing. It felt very unpredictable. At the same time, it has a very worthy message and a very important message. And it really also gave me more perspective on the topic too, which I also liked. This is a very strong movie. I liked it. I saw it twice in theaters. I really loved it. It was a great experience in theaters, honestly. It really kind of renewed that sense of like, well, new films are back, And honestly, after that, I then saw movies like Sound of Metal. I believe I watched Nomadland as well. So I watched like movies like that afterwards. So it was just kind of like, it was great. It was a great, restart essentially to the new year. So I liked it. Now I will say home media, like I said, the reason why I don't own this on home media is because it's only on Blu-ray. And I personally believe that it should have been on 4K as well. So I'm hoping that it's kind of like Parasite, where Parasite got released on Blu-ray and I picked it up immediately. And then I made that mistake because then Parasite won Best Picture and then it got released on 4K. So I'm really hoping Promising Young Woman wins Best Picture, so then it gets a 4K release. If not, maybe I'll pick up the Blu-ray of Promising Young Woman months from now because, again, I think it should be shot on 4K because it's a great-looking movie. I want to see it in the best way possible. And Blu-ray, I love Blu-ray, but I don't think it's the best way possible for this movie, especially in 2021. And anyways, guys, that's my top 10 films of 2021. Top 10 films of 2020. My mistake. Let me know yours in the comment section down below. And again, I apologize for the wait. Obviously, my top 10 worst films of 2020. You guys can check that out down below. But as always, curious to hear your guys' thoughts. Don't forget to subscription, notification bell, and I'll catch you guys later.